The wind howled through the abandoned forest as the little girl's weak cries echoed in the cold air. Her wrists burned from the rough rope, her feet dangling helplessly above the ground. The rich man, her own father, turned away without a word, leaving her to die. But deep in the shadows, a pair of dark, gentle eyes watched. Eyes that belonged to a lonely brown horse, forgotten just like her. And in that moment, fate tied their lives together in a way no one could have imagined. The forest was silent, except for the occasional rustle of dry leaves. Emma, barely 7 years old, shivered as the rope dug deeper into her skin. Her father had called her a burden before walking away. She didn't understand. She had only been sick for a few weeks. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "Please, someone help me." Suddenly, a low, warm snort broke the silence. Emma turned her head weakly and saw a tall brown horse standing a few feet away, his coat matted and his ribs visible under his skin. His eyes, though tired, held a strange kindness. The horse stepped closer, his nostrils flaring as he sniffed the air. Emma held her breath. Would he leave too? But then the horse did something unexpected. He pressed his strong head against her side, nudging her gently, as if trying to lift her. The rope groaned under her weight. Emma's heart pounded. Could he actually be trying to save her? The horse's breath was warm against Emma's skin as he pushed harder, his muscles straining against the rope that held her. She could feel his strength, the desperation in his movements, like he understood her pain. The rope creaked, fibers stretching, but it didn't break. Emma's arms ached, her legs numb from hanging for so long. She wanted to scream, but her voice was gone, stolen by fear and exhaustion. The horse suddenly stepped back, his ears twitching as if listening for something. Then, without warning, he turned and bolted into the trees, his hooves pounding against the damp earth. Emma's heart sank. Had he given up? Was she truly alone? But less than a minute later, the sound of snapping branches filled the air. The horse returned, this time dragging a broken tree limb behind him, its jagged edge sharp. Emma's eyes widened as he positioned it beneath her feet, giving her just enough support to take the weight off her wrists. She gasped as the pressure eased, her toes barely touching the rough bark. The horse nudged the branch with his nose, adjusting it carefully, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. How could an animal be this smart? Then a new sound cut through the forest, a man's voice shouting in the distance. Emma froze. Her father? Had he come back to finish what he started? The horse's head snapped up, his body tense. But the voice grew louder, angrier, and it wasn't her father's. A stranger was yelling, his words slurred, his footsteps crashing through the underbrush. The horse's ears flattened against his skull, his nostrils flaring. Emma's stomach twisted. Whoever this was, he wasn't here to help. The horse moved fast. He lowered his head and bit down on the rope above Emma's wrists, his teeth grinding against the fibers. The rope frayed, threads snapping one by one. Emma held her breath, praying it would hold long enough. But then a gunshot rang out, echoing through the trees. The horse jerked, a pained whinny escaping him as a bullet grazed his hind leg. Blood dripped onto the leaves below. Emma screamed. The stranger was closer now, his laughter cruel. "Should have stayed out of this, dumb animal," he growled. The horse didn't run. Instead, he reared up, his front hooves slashing the air, forcing the man to stumble back. Emma felt the last strands of the rope give way, and then she was falling. The ground rushed up to meet her, but strong legs caught her before she hit. The horse had positioned himself beneath her, breaking her fall. She clung to his mane as he spun around, his injured leg trembling but still moving. The stranger raised his gun again, but the horse was already charging, knocking him to the ground with a brutal shove. The gun skidded into the bushes. Emma didn't have time to think. The horse nudged her urgently, his eyes wild. She understood. They had to run. She grabbed fistfuls of his mane and pulled herself onto his back, her small body shaking. The horse didn't wait. He took off, crashing through the trees, leaving the shouting man behind. Emma pressed herself against his neck, her fingers tangled in his fur. She didn't know where they were going. She didn't even know if they'd survive. But for the first time since her father left her to die, she didn't feel alone. The forest blurred around them as the horse ran, his breath coming in ragged bursts. The gunshot wound left a trail of blood behind them, a bright red stain on the leaves. Emma could feel his strength fading, his strides becoming uneven. But he didn't stop, not even when the trees began to thin, not even when the ground sloped downward into a rocky ravine. And then, just as Emma thought they couldn't go any further, the horse staggered. His legs gave out. Emma tumbled from his back as he collapsed, his body heaving. She crawled to his side, her hands pressing against the wound, blood seeping through her fingers. "No, no, please," she begged. "You can't die, not after saving me." The horse's breaths were shallow, his eyes half-lidded. But then, from somewhere beyond the ravine, came the sound of barking. Emma's head snapped up. Dogs? No! Voices, people. A search party? She opened her mouth to scream for help, but no sound came out. Her throat was raw. The horse's ears twitched weakly. He let out a soft, shuddering breath, and then, with what seemed like his last bit of strength, he lifted his head and whinnied, the sound echoing through the trees like a call for help. Seconds later, a flashlight beam cut through the darkness. "Over here!" a woman's voice shouted. Emma's vision swam as figures rushed toward them. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the horse's eyes, still watching her, still fighting, even as his own body failed. The world came back to Emma in flashes. The sterile smell of antiseptic, the beeping of machines, the scratchy hospital blanket against her skin. Her eyelids felt heavy as lead as she forced them open, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights. A nurse stood by her bedside, adjusting an IV drip, and when she noticed Emma was awake, her face broke into a relieved smile. "There you are, sweetheart," she said softly. "You've been asleep for nearly 2 days." Emma tried to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through her wrists, where the rope burns had been bandaged. The memories rushed back. The forest, the rope, the horse, the horse! Her heart lurched. "Where is he?" she croaked, her voice barely audible. The nurse hesitated, her smile fading. "Where's who, honey?" Emma's chest tightened. "The brown horse. He saved me. He was hurt. Where is he?" Before the nurse could answer, the door to the hospital room swung open, and a tall man in a police uniform stepped inside. His expression was grim, but his eyes softened when he saw Emma awake. "Emma," he said, pulling up a chair beside her bed. "I'm Officer Daniels. We've been looking for you for a long time." Emma shrank back against the pillows. She didn't trust adults anymore, not after what her father had done. The officer seemed to understand. He kept his voice gentle. "Your father is in custody, Emma. He won't hurt you again." Emma swallowed hard. She didn't care about her father. She needed to know about the horse. "Please," she whispered. "The brown horse. Is he okay?" Officer Daniels exchanged a glance with the nurse, then sighed. "We found you in the ravine, Emma. There was a lot of blood, but no horse." Emma's breath hitched. "No, that's not possible. He was right there. He saved me." Her voice rose, cracking with desperation. The nurse placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "You've been through a lot, sweetheart. Sometimes our minds play tricks on us when we're scared." Emma shook her head violently, tears spilling down her cheeks. It wasn't a trick. The horse had been real. She could still feel his warmth, his breath, the way he'd carried her to safety even as he bled. Just then, A commotion erupted in the hallway, shouting, the sound of something heavy being wheeled past. Officer Daniels stood abruptly and stepped outside. Emma strained to hear the conversation. "Found it half a mile from where we picked up the girl," a gruff voice said. "Damn thing's still alive, barely. Vet says it's a miracle." Emma's pulse skyrocketed. She threw off the blankets, ignoring the nurse's protests, and stumbled to the door. The hallway was chaos, orderlies rushing, a gurney being pushed toward the elevators. And on that gurney, covered in bandages, his chest rising and falling weakly, was the brown horse. Emma's legs gave out. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing. He was alive. He was real. Officer Daniels hurried back to her side, helping her up. "I guess I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "Seems you were telling the truth." Emma couldn't take her eyes off the horse as the elevator doors closed behind him. "Where are they taking him?" she asked. "Animal hospital," the officer replied. "But Emma, he's in bad shape. You should prepare yourself." The next few hours passed in a blur. Emma refused to stay in bed, insisting on being wheeled down to the animal hospital wing. Through the glass window of the operating room, she watched as vets worked frantically over the horse, cleaning his wounds, administering fluids, murmuring to each other in tense voices. One of them stepped out eventually, her scrubs stained with blood. She knelt in front of Emma's wheelchair. "He's strong," she said, "but the bullet grazed an artery. He's lost a lot of blood. We're doing everything we can, but—" She didn't finish the sentence. Emma understood. She pressed her hand against the glass. "Please," she whispered. "He saved me. You have to save him." Night fell. Emma refused to leave, even as the nurses tried to convince her to rest. She dozed fitfully in the wheelchair, her dreams filled with gunshots and galloping hooves. Then, just before dawn, a hand on her shoulder startled her awake. It was the veterinarian. She was smiling. "He made it through the night," she said. Emma's breath left her in a rush. "Can I see him?" The vet nodded. "For a little while. He's still very weak." The horse lay on his side in a padded stall, his breathing shallow but steady. Bandages covered his hind leg and part of his flank. His eyes were closed, but when Emma carefully touched his neck, they fluttered open. Recognition flashed in them. Emma was sure of it. She buried her face in his mane, her tears soaking into his fur. "Thank you," she choked out. The horse exhaled softly, his nose nudging her arm. Officer Daniels appeared in the doorway. "Emma," he said gently, "there's something you need to know." He held out a newspaper. The headline screamed, "Millionaire Abandons Disabled Daughter in Forest." Underneath was a photo of her father, his face smug in a courtroom sketch. But it was the subheading that made Emma's blood run cold. "Illegal horse racing ring busted. Animals scheduled for euthanasia." Emma's head snapped up. "What does this mean?" The officer hesitated. "The horse that saved you. He wasn't just some wild animal, Emma. He was part of an underground racing operation. The man who shot at you in the forest, he was one of the trainers. These horses, they're considered property. And now that the ring's been shut down—" He didn't need to finish. Emma understood with horrifying clarity. They were going to kill him. Her hands clenched into fists. "No," she said, her voice trembling with a newfound strength. "I won't let them." The horse's ears twitched, his dark eyes fixed on her face. Emma met his gaze and made a promise. Not just to him, but to herself. She wouldn't lose him. Not after everything. Emma's hands shook as she gripped the newspaper, the words blurring through her tears. The horse, her savior, wasn't just in danger from his injuries. He was marked for death by the very people who had already abused him. She turned back to the stall, where the brown horse lay breathing weakly, his ribs still too visible beneath his dull coat. He had fought so hard to survive, only to face execution for crimes he didn't commit. A fire ignited in Emma's chest, burning away the last of her fear. She wiped her face roughly and looked up at Officer Daniels. "What happens now?" she demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. The officer sighed, running a hand through his hair. "The racing ring was operating under a fake rescue organization," he explained. "They'd taken injured or useless horses, then forced them to race for gambling profits. When the animals couldn't run anymore..." He trailed off, but the meaning was clear. Emma's stomach twisted. The man in the forest hadn't just been trying to scare them away. He'd been sent to silence the escaped horse permanently. A new voice cut through the tension. "Actually, it's not that simple." A woman in a sharp pantsuit stepped into the room, her heels clicking against the tile. She held out a badge. "Agent Reyes, Animal Welfare Task Force. We've been tracking this operation for months." Her gaze flicked to the horse, then to Emma. "And thanks to you, we finally have enough evidence to bury them." Emma's breath caught. "What does that mean for him?" Agent Reyes hesitated. "Legally, he's still considered evidence once the trial is over." Emma didn't let her finish. "No." The word came out louder than she intended, making the horse stir in his stall. She lowered her voice, but not her intensity. "You can't let them kill him after what he's been through, after what he did for me." Agent Reyes studied her for a long moment, then surprised Emma by kneeling to her eye level. "You're right," she said quietly, "but the law is the law, unless ... A slow smile spread across her face. "Unless he's no longer evidence, unless he has a new legal owner." Emma's heart pounded. "How?" The agent straightened up, all business again. "There's a provision for animals seized in cruelty cases. If a qualified individual petitions for guardianship before the evidentiary hold is placed." She pulled a card from her pocket and handed it to Emma. "You'll need a lawyer, and you'll need to move fast. The paperwork has to be filed before noon tomorrow." Officer Daniels whistled low. "That's less than 12 hours." Emma stared at the card, then at the horse. His ears were pricked forward now, as if he understood every word. She thought of her father's money, the trust fund she'd inherited from her mother, the one he'd never been able to touch. For the first time, she was glad for it. "I'll do it," she said. Agent Reyes nodded approvingly. "Then you'd better get started. I'll hold off the evidence transfer as long as I can." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Emma, you should know. This horse isn't just any racer. His track name was Iron Will. He was their champion, until he refused to run anymore." The pieces clicked together. The horse hadn't just saved her out of instinct. He'd recognized another victim of cruelty, another soul who'd been thrown away. Emma reached through the bars to touch his nose. "We're getting you out of here," she whispered. The next hours passed in a whirlwind. A lawyer was called, a stern woman named Ms. Gupta, who listened to Emma's story, glanced at the horse, and immediately started drafting filings. "We'll argue abandonment of ownership due to the illegal activities," she said, typing furiously. "With your testimony and the vet records showing neglect, we have a strong case." Emma signed where she was told, her hands only shaking a little. But as night deepened, a new problem arose. The vet pulled Emma aside, her face grave. "His infection is spreading," she said quietly. "We're doing everything we can, but he needs a specialized procedure. The equipment is only at the university hospital." Emma's blood ran cold. "How do we get him there?" The vet hesitated. "That's the issue. Until the custody is settled, he can't be moved off this premises. And even if he could..." She didn't say it, but Emma understood. They were running out of time. Emma sat by the horse's stall all night, watching his labored breathing. She told him stories about the farm she'd visit with her mother, about wide green fields and cool streams. His ears twitched at the descriptions, as if he could see them too. Just before dawn, Agent Reyes burst into the room, her phone in hand. "We have a problem," she said. "The racing ring's lawyer filed an injunction. They're claiming the horse is valuable property and demanding his return." Emma shot to her feet. "They can't do that." "They just did," Ms. Gupta said grimly, entering behind her. "A judge will hear both sides at 10 a.m. She checked her watch. 3 hours. Emma looked at the horse, at Iron Will, lying there fighting for his life, while lawyers argued over him like he was a piece of furniture. Something inside her snapped. "No," she said, her voice low and fierce. "I'm not waiting for some judge." She turned to the vet. "What if he wasn't here at 10 a.m.? The room went very quiet. Officer Daniels was the first to react. "Emma, that would be stealing evidence." Agent Reyes's lips quirked. "Not if the animal is removed for emergency medical treatment." She exchanged a look with the vet, who suddenly became very interested in her clipboard. "Of course, we'd need plausible deniability." Ms. Gupta pinched the bridge of her nose. "I didn't hear any of this." She pointed at Emma. "But if you're going to do something stupid, it better work." Emma didn't hesitate. She grabbed the vet's arm. "How do we move him?" The plan came together in frantic whispers. An ambulance was called, a real one, from the university hospital, arranged by a friend of the vet. Paperwork was misplaced. Distractions were planned. And through it all, Iron Will watched with quiet understanding, as if he knew this was their last chance. As the first rays of sunlight crept through the windows, the back door of the animal hospital opened silently. The horse, heavily sedated but stable, was loaded into the modified ambulance on a special ramp. Emma climbed in after him, her heart in her throat. Agent Reyes leaned in before closing the doors. "Don't stop for anyone," she said. Then, softer. "Good luck." The ambulance pulled away just as a black sedan screeched into the parking lot. Emma caught a glimpse of angry men in suits storming the building before the vehicle turned the corner. She exhaled shakily and pressed her forehead against Iron Will's neck. "Hold on," she begged him. "Just a little longer." The university loomed ahead, its animal hospital sign gleaming in the morning light. But as they approached, the ambulance's radio crackled to life. The driver paled. "Emma, we've got company." Emma turned to look out the back window. 2 police cruisers were speeding toward them, lights flashing. The ambulance swerved as the driver cursed under his breath, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Emma clung to Iron Will's side as the vehicle lurched, her stomach dropping with every turn. The police sirens wailed louder, closer. Were they being chased? Or was this some terrible coincidence? She pressed her face against the small rear window, her breath fogging the glass. The cruisers were gaining fast, their lights painting the ambulance interior in flashes of red and blue. One pulled up alongside, the officer inside motioning violently for them to pull over. The ambulance driver glanced at Emma in the rearview mirror, his face etched with panic. "What do I do?" he shouted over the sirens. Emma's mind raced. If they stopped now, Iron Will would be taken back to certain death. But if they ran... She looked down at the horse. His breathing had grown more labored during the ride, his nostrils flaring with each pained inhale. The bandage on his leg was soaked through with fresh blood. They didn't have time for this. She made a split-second decision. "Don't stop," she ordered, her voice steadier than she felt. "Get us to the hospital." The driver hesitated only a second before flooring the accelerator. The ambulance surged forward, throwing Emma back against the wall. The police cruiser fell behind momentarily before roaring back with renewed determination. Up ahead, the university hospital's emergency bay was visible, so close, yet impossibly far. Suddenly, the radio crackled again. "Ambulance 42, this is dispatch. You are ordered to pull over immediately." The driver's hand hovered over the radio, uncertain. Emma shook her head fiercely. "They'll kill him," she said, her voice breaking. "Please." Just as the ambulance neared the hospital entrance, the lead police cruiser executed a terrifying maneuver. It sped ahead and then skidded sideways, blocking the ambulance's path. The driver slammed on the brakes. Emma screamed as she was thrown forward, barely managing to brace herself before crashing into Iron Will. The horse let out a weak groan, his legs twitching. Outside, officers were already leaping from, squeaking against the polished floors. She needed to warn someone. Agent Reyes, the hospital security, anyone. But as she turned the corner, she nearly collided with a tall figure in a white coat. The man steadied her, his grip firm. "Easy there," he said. Emma looked up into a face she didn't recognize, sharp features, cold eyes, a smile that didn't reach them. Her instincts screamed at her to back away. This wasn't one of Iron Will's doctors. "Sorry," she mumbled, trying to sidestep him, but the man's grip tightened slightly. "You're Emma, right?" he asked, his voice too casual. "The girl with the horse?" Emma's pulse spiked. Something was wrong. The way he said it, like he already knew the answer. She jerked her arm free. "I have to go," she said. And before he could respond, she darted down the hall, her heart hammering. She didn't look back, but she could feel his gaze burning into her. She burst into Iron Will's recovery room and slammed the door behind her, locking it. The horse lifted his head weakly at the sudden noise, his ears flicking forward in concern. Emma pressed her back against the door, her breath coming in short gasps. "It's okay," she whispered, more to herself than to him. But it wasn't okay. They weren't safe here. That man, whoever he was, had gotten past security. Had he been sent by the racing ring? Were there others? A knock at the door made her jump. "Emma?" It was Agent Reyes's voice. "Open up. We have a problem." Emma hesitated. What if it wasn't really her? What if it was a trick? But then the agent spoke again, lower this time. "The man from the forest. He's here. We just spotted him on security footage." Emma's shoulders sagged in relief. She unlocked the door and yanked it open. Agent Reyes stood there, her usual composure frayed at the edges. Behind her, 2 uniformed officers scanned the hallway. "We're locking down the floor," Reyes said, stepping inside. "But we need to move you and the horse. Now." Emma didn't argue. She helped the vet unhook Iron Will's monitors, her hands shaking as she worked. The horse struggled to stand, his legs trembling under his weight, but he didn't resist. It was like he understood the urgency. As they guided him into a wheelchair transport, the only thing strong enough to support his size, Emma caught a glimpse of movement at the far end of the hallway, a shadow slipping behind a corner. Her throat tightened. They were being watched. The vet led them through a maze of back hallways, avoiding the main elevators. Iron Will's breathing was labored, his nostrils flaring with the effort of moving, but he didn't stop. Emma kept one hand on his neck, murmuring encouragement. They reached a service elevator and crammed inside, the space barely big enough for all of them. As the doors slid shut, Emma thought she heard running footsteps. The basement level was eerily quiet, lit by flickering fluorescent lights. The vet hurried ahead, leading them to a secluded recovery stall, usually reserved for contagious animals. "He'll be safe here for now," she said, helping Iron Will inside. Emma didn't miss the way her eyes darted toward the door. None of them believed this was over. Agent Reyes pulled Emma aside. "Listen to me," she said quietly. "This isn't just about the horse anymore. You're a witness now, a threat to them." Emma swallowed hard. "What do we do?" Reyes hesitated, then handed her a burner phone. "There's a safe house outside the city. We'll take you there tonight. Both of you. But until then, you don't trust anyone. Understand? Not even hospital staff." Emma nodded, her fingers tightening around the phone. She glanced back at Iron Will, who was lying down again, his sides heaving. They'd come so far, survived so much, and now they were being hunted. A sudden crash echoed from somewhere upstairs. the sound of something heavy falling, then shouting. Agent Reyes stiffened. "They're inside," she muttered. She turned to the vet. "Get them out the loading dock, now." Emma didn't have time to process what was happening before she was being pushed toward Iron Will again. The horse sensed the panic. He lurched to his feet, his eyes wide and alert, despite his exhaustion. The vet grabbed a lead rope. "This way," she urged, pulling him toward a back exit. Emma followed, her legs moving on pure adrenaline. They burst out into the loading dock, the cool night air hitting Emma's face like a slap. A nondescript van was parked nearby, its engine running. The vet didn't hesitate. She led Iron Will straight to it, where a woman in tactical gear stood waiting. "In," the woman ordered, yanking open the rear doors. But just as Iron Will took a stumbling step forward, a gunshot rang out. The bullet hit the pavement inches from the horse's hooves. Emma screamed as Iron Will reared up in panic, his injured leg buckling. She lunged for him, but it was too late. He crashed onto his side, his breathing frantic. Behind them, at the top of the loadings ramp, stood the shooter. His gun was raised, and this time he wasn't aiming for the ground. Agent Reyes shoved Emma behind the van and drew her own weapon. "Get down!" she barked. Emma hit the pavement just as another shot fired. The gunshot echoed like thunder in the confined loading dock. Emma felt the vibration of the bullet hitting metal as she pressed herself against the van's rear tire, her hands instinctively covering her head. Iron Will thrashed on the ground nearby, his hooves scraping against pavement as he tried desperately to stand. The shooter was already moving down the ramp, his boots crunching on broken glass, his gun swinging between Agent Reyes and the fallen horse. Emma's vision tunneled. She couldn't lose Iron Will now. Not like this. Without thinking, she grabbed a rusted pipe from the loading dock floor and lunged. The shooter was too focused on Reyes to see Emma coming. The pipe connected with his wrist just as he pulled the trigger again. The shot went wide, shattering an overhead light in a rain of sparks. The man roared in pain, backhanding Emma so hard she tasted blood. She hit the ground rolling, her ears ringing. Agent Reyes seized the moment. 2 precise gunshots rang out. The shooter staggered but didn't fall. He was wearing a vest. With a snarl, he turned and fired wildly at Reyes, forcing her behind a dumpster. Emma saw her chance. She scrambled to Iron Will, her fingers fumbling with the lead rope. "Get up!" she begged, her voice raw. "Please!" The horse's nostrils flared, his dark eyes rolling white with panic. But at her touch, he heaved himself upright, his injured leg trembling violently. The shooter noticed. He pivoted, gun rising, but then the van's engine roared. The tactical officer floored it, sending the vehicle lurching directly at the shooter. He dove aside at the last second, rolling behind a stack of pallets. "Emma, now!" Reyes shouted, emerging from cover to lay down suppressing fire. Emma didn't hesitate. She hauled Iron Will toward the open van doors, the horse limping beside her in staggering leaps. Another bullet whizzed past, embedding itself in the van's frame. Just as they reached it, Iron Will's legs gave out. Emma screamed as he collapsed halfway into the van, his hindquarters still exposed. The shooter was reloading. Then, a miracle. The vet appeared from nowhere, syringe in hand. She jammed it into Iron Will's flank. "This'll give him 5 minutes of adrenaline!" she yelled over the gunfire. "Push!" Emma threw her entire weight against the horse's side. With an almost supernatural burst of strength, Iron Will surged forward, tumbling fully into the van. Emma dove in after him, just as Reyes slid into the passenger seat. "Go, go, go!" The van peeled out, tires screeching. Through the rear windows, Emma saw the shooter sprint after them for a few futile steps before vanishing into the night. They'd made it. Barely. Inside the van, Iron Will was a mess of sweat and blood, his breathing ragged from the adrenaline shot. Emma pressed her forehead to his, whispering nonsense reassurances. Agent Reyes twisted in her seat, her face grim. "We have another problem," she said, holding up her phone. The screen showed a news alert. Police seeking girl and horse in connection with hospital shooting. Emma's stomach dropped. The headline beneath was worse. Millionaire's daughter believed brainwashed by animal rights extremists. A photo of her father smirking in court filled half the screen. "He's spinning this," Reyes said darkly, "saying you were kidnapped by activists who shot up the hospital to steal the horse." The tactical officer, now introduced as Sergeant Cole, gripped the wheel tighter. "Safe house is compromised. Where to?" Reyes hesitated, just a beat too long. That's when the van's rear window exploded. Glass rained down as a motorcycle roared up alongside them, its rider clad in black. Not the shooter, someone new. The rider raised a gloved hand, and Emma saw the glint of something metallic. "Down!" Cole yanked the wheel hard left. The van swerved violently as a small device slapped against the side window, a magnetic GPS tracker. "They're not trying to kill us," Reyes realized aloud, horror dawning. "They're hurting us." Emma clutched Iron Will's mane as the van accelerated down back roads, the motorcycle shadowing them from a distance. The horse's breathing was becoming erratic again, his body shuddering as the adrenaline wore off. They needed shelter, medical care, time they didn't have. Then Cole took a sharp turn onto a dirt road, the van bouncing over ruts. "Old ranch up ahead," he grunted. "Abandoned, but the owner's friendly." The ranch was a crumbling silhouette in the moonlight, its fences broken, its fields overgrown. But as they skidded to a stop near the barn, a figure emerged from the shadows. An elderly man with a shotgun. Emma's heart leapt to her throat until the man lowered his weapon. "Reyes," he greeted tersely. "Heard the fireworks. No time for explanations." They half-carried Iron Will into the barn, where the old man, call me Doc, had a makeshift veterinary station set up. As he examined the horse's leg, his face grew grave. "Infection's back. Worse this time." He held up a syringe. "This is the strong stuff. It'll help him fight, but—" He met Emma's eyes. "If we don't get real antibiotics in him by dawn, he won't make it." Emma's knees buckled. She caught herself on a hay bale, her fingers digging into the rough strands. They were trapped, hunted, out of options. That's when Iron Will lifted his head weakly and nudged her hand. Then he did something extraordinary. He nodded toward the barn's back wall. Confused, Emma followed his gaze. Beneath a tarp was the unmistakable shape of a horse trailer. Doc followed her stare and chuckled darkly. "Ain't been used in years, but if you're thinking what I think you're thinking—" He limped to the wall and yanked the tarp away, revealing not just a trailer, but a faded logo, Sun Valley Racetrack. Emma's breath caught. Iron Will knew this place. He'd been here before. Reyes was already on her phone. "I know where we can get those antibiotics," she said slowly. "But Emma, it means going back to where this all started." She looked up, her eyes hard. "We have to break into the racing ring's compound." Outside, the distant roar of approaching engines cut through the night. The roar of approaching engines grew louder, vibrating through the rotting wood of the abandoned barn. Iron Will's ears swiveled toward the sound, his nostrils flaring as he struggled to stand despite his ravaged leg. Emma pressed her palm against his sweat-slicked neck, feeling his pulse hammering beneath her fingers. Too fast, too weak. Doc's warning echoed in her skull like a death sentence. Dawn. He won't last past dawn. She turned to Reyes, whose face was illuminated in the ghostly blue light of her phone screen. "The racing compound has a full veterinary clinic," Reyes murmured, zooming in on a satellite map. "Stocked with everything we need, but it's guarded like a military base." Sergeant Cole ejected his pistol's magazine, checked it, and slammed it back in with a sharp click. "We go in quiet," he said. "Take what we need. Burn the rest." His gaze flicked to Iron Will. "But he can't come. Not in his condition." Emma opened her mouth to protest, but the horse beat her to it. With a sudden, violent jerk of his head, Iron Will knocked over a rusty bucket, the clang startling everyone. Then he limped forward, one agonizing step at a time, to nudge the faded Sun Valley racetrack logo on the trailer. When no one reacted, he did it again, more insistently, his breath coming in pained snorts. Doc sucked his teeth. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "He ain't just pointing to where he's been. He's pointing to how—" He strode to the trailer and kicked loose a hidden panel beneath the license plate. A set of keys clattered to the dirt. "This old hauler's got one trick left. Sunburst decals are removable. Peel 'em off, and it looks like any other farm trailer." His eyes met Emma's. "Your horse remembers the smuggling routes." The revelation hung in the air as the engine sounds outside crescendoed, then abruptly cut off. Too close. Rhea snapped into action. "New plan. Emma and Iron Will take the trailer to the compound. We'll create a diversion at the front gate, while you slip in through the back pastures." She grabbed Emma's shoulders. "You'll have 10 minutes to find the antibiotics." 10. Then all hell breaks loose. Emma's hands shook as she helped Doc peel off the racetrack decals. The plan was suicide. But Iron Will was watching her with those dark, knowing eyes, and she understood. This was his fight, too. The men who'd broken his body still had other horses trapped there. Other Iron's Wills, waiting for someone to set them free. They moved fast. The trailer hitched smoothly to Doc's ancient pickup, its true identity now hidden under layers of grime. Iron Will practically collapsed inside it, his legs buckling the moment they stopped pushing him forward. Emma climbed in after him, her knees sinking into the soiled straw. "I'll be back with the medicine," Doc promised, slamming the door shut. "You just keep him alive till then." The truck rumbled to life. Through the trailer's ventilation slats, Emma watched the barn shrink behind them as they bounced onto a back road so overgrown it was barely a path. Branches screeched against the trailer's sides like fingernails on a chalkboard. Iron Will lay with his head in her lap, his breathing increasingly shallow. Emma stroked the white star between his eyes, whispering the story of how they'd first met. The rope, the gunshot, the way he'd carried her to safety even as he bled. "You have to do it one more time," she begged. "Just one more time." After an eternity of jolting turns, the truck slowed. The acrid stench of manure and fear hit Emma's nose, even before Doc's hissed warning through the trailer wall. "Compounds ahead!" Guards at the pasture gate. "Get ready." Emma peeked through the slats. The racing compound sprawled before them like a nightmare. Rows of barbed wire paddocks, holding emaciated horses, their ribs protruding like barrel staves. A guard with a shotgun slouched near the gate, his face lit by the glow of his phone. Doc rolled down his window and launched into a slurred rant about lost cattle, his words deliberately muddled. The guard waved him through with a disgusted sneer, barely glancing at the trailer. They were in. The truck crept past darkened stables, the sounds of restless horses and occasional shouts echoing around them. Emma's pulse pounded in her ears as she spotted the veterinary clinic, a prefab building with a red cross painted crookedly on the door. Doc parked behind a mountain of soiled hay bales. "Go," he whispered. "I'll keep watch." Emma slipped from the trailer, her legs nearly giving out from adrenaline and exhaustion. Iron Will tried to follow, but she pressed a hand to his muzzle. "Stay," she breathed. "I'll be right back." The clinic door was locked, but the flimsy window beside it shattered easily under her elbow. She wriggled through, glass biting into her skin, and landed in a room reeking of antiseptic and decay. Shelves of medications lined the walls. Emma grabbed at random, penicillin, tetracycline, anything labeled antibiotic, stuffing them into her hoodie pocket. Then she froze. A sound from the adjacent room, the wet, labored breathing of an animal in pain. Against every screaming instinct, she crept toward it. The sight would haunt her forever. A skeletal bay horse stood shackled in a restraint chute, its legs oozing where spurs had gouged the flesh. But worse, so much worse, was the small figure curled in the straw beside it. A boy, no older than 8. His wrists were bound with the same rough rope that had once held Emma. The boy lifted his head, his eyes widening at the sight of her. "You're the girl from the news," he croaked. "The one who stole the champion." Emma's blood turned to ice. "Stole?" Before the boy could answer, a door slammed outside. Heavy footsteps approached. Emma dove behind a supply cabinet as a man's voice snarled, "Told you to dose them all. The buyers arrive at dawn." A second voice, trembling, "But sir, the chestnut mare's full." "No witnesses," the first voice hissed. "No loose ends." Emma's fingers found a rusted scalpel in the debris. Outside, Doc's truck engine coughed to life. Their agreed-upon 5-minute warning. She had to move. Now. But as she turned to flee, the boy caught her wrist. His whisper was barely audible. "The foal. It's Iron Will's." The world tilted. Emma stared at the bay mare, now recognizing the same stubborn set of the ears, the same defiant gleam in the eyes, despite her suffering. Iron Will had a child, and these men were about to kill it. Somewhere in the compound, an alarm began to wail. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Iron Will had a foal, a baby he probably didn't even know existed, and it was about to be slaughtered just to cover up the racing ring's crimes. The alarms wailed louder, footsteps pounding closer. She had seconds to decide. Grab the antibiotics and run, or risk everything to save the foal. Then she remembered the look in Iron Will's eyes when he had carried her through the burning forest. He hadn't hesitated. Emma snatched the scalpel and sliced the boy's bonds. "Can you walk?" He nodded, scrambling up. She shoved the antibiotics into his hands. "Take these to the old man in the truck outside. Tell him it's for Iron Will. Run." The boy darted away like a shadow. Emma turned to the bay mare, her fingers working frantically at the shackles. The mare's eyes rolled in fear, but she didn't resist. The last lock clicked open just as the clinic door burst inward. A hulking figure filled the doorway, the same man from the hospital loading dock. His lip curled when he saw Emma. "Persistent little rat," he spat, raising a pistol. The bay mare reared with a scream, her hooves crashing down on the man's shoulder. He roared in pain, the gun skittering across the floor. Emma dove for it, but he tackled her, his fingers closing around her throat. Black spots danced in her vision as he snarled, "You should have died in that forest." Then, a sound that shook the walls. A thunderous, familiar crash as the clinic's back wall splintered inward. Iron Will stood in the wreckage, his chest heaving, his injured leg trembling, but holding. He had jumped from the moving trailer to reach her. The man barely had time to turn before Iron Will charged. It wasn't the graceful gallop of a racer. It was the raw, brutal fury of a protector. His shoulder slammed into the man's ribs, sending him flying into a shelf of medications. Glass shattered. The man didn't get up. Emma gasped for air, stumbling to her feet. Iron Will nudged her, urgently, toward the bay mare, who was now frantically calling to a tiny, wobbly-legged foal hidden in the shadows. The pieces clicked. This was why the mare had fought so hard. She was hiding her baby. Outside, chaos erupted, gunfire, shouting, the distant wail of police sirens. Emma grabbed a lead rope and hooked it to the mare's halter. "We have to go now," she urged. The mare resisted for only a second before the foal stumbled after her. Iron Will brought up the rear, his body shielding them as they burst into the night. Doc's truck was gone, but the trailer remained, the boy waiting inside with the antibiotics. They loaded the horses, just as Reyes and Cole sprinted into view, their faces bloody but triumphant. "Ring's finished," Reyes panted. "Police have the evidence. Let's move." 1 year later, The morning sun painted golden streaks across the pasture as Emma leaned against the fence of Iron Will Sanctuary, watching the horses graze. The bay mare, now named Ember, nipped playfully at her growing foal, Little Thunder. Nearby, Iron Will stood proudly, his scars faded but still visible, his leg healed strong. The boy they'd rescued, Miguel, ran up, grinning. "The bus is here! They're waiting." Emma ruffled his hair. The bus was actually a donated school van, now bringing other rescued kids to the sanctuary every weekend. It had been Miguel's idea. As the first group of children tumbled out, their laughter ringing across the fields, Iron Will lifted his head and whinnied, a sound that once meant defiance, but now meant welcome. Moral lesson: the world tries to break the kind and the brave, but true strength isn't in running the fastest. It's in standing up for those who can't run at all. And sometimes, the family you choose is the one that saves you,